What I'd like to do now is talk about how we summarize data. If my data only consists of a few numbers, I should just stop and report those numbers. So this is an important thing to think about. The word statistic means a summary of your data. So why do we do statistics? Because we have too much data to just report to someone. The purpose of statistics is to summarize the data we have in a way that's useful. So I'm going to use an example that only has a few data points in order to make it easy to do some calculations. But it's important for you to realize that if you have a small data set, say with only 3 or 4 numbers, you should just report it rather than do anything fancier than that. Statistics is not magic. It's just a way to report the information that you have in a concise way. However, for our purposes, since I don't want to be doing calculations on the board that involve 10,000 numbers, I'm going to imagine a data set that only has 4 numbers and use it to talk about the methods we might use if we actually had more data. So suppose that I had 4 students and I asked each student how many statistics courses she had taken previously. So if I have those 4 students, it's possible that the first 2 students would say 0. They'd say, I've never taken a statistics course before. And it's possible that the 3rd student would have taken 2 courses before, and then maybe I have someone who's an advanced statistics student who'd had 6 courses before. So here's my data set. Now again, perhaps I could just stop. If someone over here said to me, hey, in your class of 4 students, how much statistics experience do the students have? The best thing I could say probably would be, well, 2 of them are novices, 1 of them has had a couple courses, and 1 of them is really advanced. And I can say that. It didn't take me very long, and it completely summarized my data. However, most of the time we have more data than we can summarize easily in a sentence like that. So what we're going to think about now is how we can convey the pattern in this data, in a way that will help someone else understand what we have without reciting the actual numbers. And there's 2 elements of the pattern in this data that we're going to think about. We're going to think about the middle, about where is the middle. On average, how many previous statistics courses do students have? And then we're also going to think about dispersion. How far are these numbers from the middle, typically? So let's talk about the middle. So one thing that's important to do is make a plot of the data. So if we do that, maybe here 0, 2, 4, and 6, what our data says is that we have 2 people with 0s, one person with a 2 and 1 person with a 6. So I find this helpful to see the shape of the data, the pattern in the data as well. Because if I look at this plot and you ask me, well, okay, what's the average, what's the middle? I think it's somewhere around here, right? If I had to just kind of draw a line, if I had more students, where would the middle be? Maybe like right around there, right? That's based on nothing but looking at this graphic. But the purpose of the discussion we're having now is to think about how we might quantify this middle. How might we decide how we're going to describe the middle? One thing that's important to know is any method you can come up with for describing the middle is probably just as useful and valid as anything that's more conventional, anything that people have done throughout history. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that people have done in their terms I think you've heard before, but it's important again to know that any method you come up with for describing the middle of some data is just as good as the methods that I'm mentioning now. So when I ask students, how am I going to describe the middle of this data, the most common term that people come up with is the mean. I'm going to erase this line so that we know that there are many possible ways to describe the middle. If I ask someone what's the mean, you've probably heard before that the way to come up with this mean is to add the 4 numbers together and divide by 4. So we can do that. And if we do this, 0 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6 is 8, divided by 4 is 2. The mean of this data set is 2. The mean is right here. That is one way to describe the pattern in my data. In my opinion, if somebody asked about the composition of my class in terms of their statistics experience and all I said is the mean is 2, that would not be enough information, but it certainly is a useful piece of information to convey. What else? Another term you've probably heard before is median. The median is the middle number. If you have an odd number of data points, so suppose there was another person here who had a 4, then if I had 5 total data points, the middle one, the third one, would be the median. So if I had a 4 here, I would count in 1, 2, 3, and 2 would be the median. However, here I have an even number of data points. So what I do is I find the 2 middle points. So if I have 4 data points, the middle points are the second one and the third one. So the second smallest point is a 0, the third smallest point is a 2, and I take the mean of those 2. So here the median is equal to the mean of 0 and 2, which is 1. So the median and the mean are not the same value in this particular data set, and that's typical. Typically, the two values are not the same. And that is good, because if someone said, could you please report what's going on in the data, I could say, well, the mean is 2, but the median is 1. And what that tells you is that half of my students have 1 statistics course or less, half my students have 1 statistics course or more, but the mean is higher than that, which tells you that there are some students who are bringing this average up, some students who have higher values. So this is typical. If you have a distribution, a set of values that looks like this, and there are some very high ones, if the mean is higher than the median, then again you know that's the case. That even though the middle value is right here, the mean is higher because perhaps I have some very large points that are being averaged in. The other word that people are used to hearing when we hear the terms mean and median is just mode. Mode means the most common value. Often there are multiple modes. So in this case, there are 2 zeros, and there's 1 of each of the other numbers, so the mode is 0. In this little data set that I've created, the mean, median, and mode are all different numbers, but they convey different pieces of information. Again, the median tells us that half of the data is less than that value and half is more than that value. The mean is very influenced by numbers that are very high or very low. So if the mean is higher than the median, we know we have some very large numbers. The mode is just telling us the most common value, the most common value. So if I had to pick one number, if I'm going to take my 4 students, put their names in a hat and draw 1, and you want me to bet on what that student's previous statistics experience is going to be, I'm going to bet on 0 because that's the most common value. 2 out of the 4 students in my little data set here have 0 statistics experience prior to this course. So these are 3 different ways that I can think of to talk about the center of this data, the center of this data. But if you can think of another one, that's just as valid. These are just 3 methods people have talked about.